Welcome to Living the Smarter Science of Slim, where we provide a scientifically proven lifestyle for long-term health and fat loss by eating more and exercising less, but smarter.
Eat smarter, exercise smarter, live better. I am so ready for that. Hey everyone, welcome to your weekly Smarter Science of Slim podcast. I'm here with Jonathan Bailor.
And you are?
I am Carrie Brown.
Carrie Brown, folks. We didn't replace Carrie yet. No, I'm just kidding. So, Carrie, if you recall, last week we started on a bit of a new path for the Smarter Science of Slim, started talking a bit about the history of how we got into the confusing world that we find ourselves in. Talked a bit about the food guide pyramid, my plate, and how that relates to the overall history of human eating and how it was not possible, let alone healthy, for 99.8% of our existence. And then we talked about how that all originated from a political document, not a scientific document. It came out in 1976. And we talked about how the scientific community had a lot of not so nice things to say about that document.
Okay, I remember that. I remember getting all upset.
You were a little verklempt. I thought you didn't emote as much as I expected. Maybe it was just because you were like, this is sad.
I was trying to be professional and grown up.
What you don't know is that Carrie actually threw a chair out the window when we finished. No.
What are we talking about this week?
This week, we're going to talk about, I can imagine that you and I, when I first learned this, and potentially our listeners now, are like, okay, well then why did that document even get released? Like, let's go back, take me back further in history and tell me how this happened. And that's what I was hoping to do this week. And it is actually fairly simple because it's all really traceable back to one person, a gentleman by the name of Ancel Keys. And we need to just go back a few decades prior to 1976, go back to the 1950s. And Mr. Keys examined the diet and heart disease trends in 22 countries. Now, remember the number 22. Okay, he did a study of 22 countries. Mr. Keys then published a study which included data from 6 countries. Okay, right now, that already seems odd, right? You have data from 22. You publish a study that only reports 6 of them. And coincidentally, those are the 6 countries which showed a scary relationship between diet and heart disease. Specifically, again, there were 22 countries, but what Keys reported was that in Japan, Italy, England, Australia, Canada, and the United States, the greater the percent of calories one got from fat, the higher their incidence of heart disease, or the higher the heart disease death rate was. And I'll post this graphic. There's a graphic we're looking at here up on the show notes. But again, 6 of the 22 countries showed a positive correlation between the amount of fat you eat and heart disease deaths.
Okay.
All right. Now, here are the facts. When data from all 22 countries in Keys' study are examined, there is no relationship, none, between fat intake and heart disease deaths. Keys selectively picked data and designed a headline-worthy conclusion. In the words of a fellow researcher at the time, no information is given by Keys on how or why the 6 countries were selected. In fact, Carrie, further exposing the sketchiness of the methods here, the same researchers who I just quoted above, they chose 6 different countries: Finland, Australia, Ireland, Switzerland, Germany, and the Netherlands, from Keys' own data, and show that those countries suggest a negative relationship between fat and heart disease death, meaning the more fat people in those countries ate, the lower the incidence of heart disease death.
I want to live in one of those countries because I love fat, as you know.
Well, and the key point here, Carrie, is that this is bogus data. Researchers who looked at Keys' data afterwards concluded the examination of all available basic data show the association between fat and heart disease lacks validity. And in fact, they discovered a strong negative association for both animal protein and fat with mortality from non-cardiac diseases.
Did we ever find out why he did it the way he did? Did anyone ever ask? Did anyone ever?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. I just wondered.
I can imagine. I mean, you can imagine various reasons. But even the American Medical Association at the time spoke up in protest, saying the anti-fat, anti-cholesterol fad is not just foolish and futile; it also carries some risk. But again, this all took place decades and decades and decades ago and was debunked by the actual experts back then. However, if you walk up to someone on the street today and say, does eating more fat increase or decrease your risk of heart disease?
They'll say absolutely
they will
yes.
all say it increases it. And
So somehow his theory lived on.
Well, and here's why, Carrie,
regardless of the fact that it was nonsense.
Scary propaganda, is very easy to spread, right? I mean, that's saying that, oh my God, if you eat more fat, look at this graph, and folks, go to the show notes. I mean, if you didn't know there were 22 countries whose data was collected, and you just saw this graph, it's like an exponential graph showing that the more fat you eat, holy crap, you're going to get heart disease. But again, that was 6 of 22 countries. We can pick another 6 and draw a graph which says, oh my gosh, the more fat I eat, the less heart disease deaths I'm going to get. You can't do that. You can't take 6 countries and selectively report on those. But the challenge here, folks, is that happened, and Dr. Keyes was effective at getting his message out. He was on the cover of Time magazine, had a large impact on our government, and in fact played an influential role on our dietary guidelines, food guide pyramid, and my plate. And if you can see how those diets are impacted by this, because their cornerstone is starch. Why is it starch? It's starch because starch is low in fat. And if you can't eat fat, most animal products are off the table. Quite a few plants like nuts and seeds are off the table. Really, the only thing left besides fruits and vegetables is starch.
Although actually a lot of the starches that we eat come with a fair amount of fat in them. I'm thinking, cakes and stuff like that.
Yes, yeah, and certainly even in the government's graphics, they would put that in the fat and oil and sweet category. But these things like breads and pastas and potatoes, that's really the backbone of that diet because it is low in fat. But you're exactly right, Carrie. We generally see starch and sugar and fat, often all 3 combined, and that's not a fun.
And don't you think it's true that people will, if they're on a traditional diet, they'll stop eating the cake because of the fat?
Yes, exactly.
They'll stop the things they'll stop eating are because of the fat.
Yep.
Although the fact that in reality, as you've shown over the last few podcasts, if you stop eating cake, the better result you get is because they're not eating the carbohydrate and the sugar.
Yeah, the sugar and the starch, exactly.
It's not the fat that's being missing that's giving them the result. It's the starch and the sugar that's being missing that's giving them the result. Absolutely.
And in fact, if you look at same kind of thing with a hamburger, and I'm not talking about a hamburger that's made with pink slime. I'm talking about a hamburger made with an organic, grass-fed, lean beef ground up and served on a bun. People say, oh, a hamburger is bad for you. Well, the bun is bad for you. The beef itself is not going to be a problem. And again, this has been so ingrained. This fat is bad dogma is so pervasive. So let's dig into our treasure trove of hard science and provide some counter arguments here. So let's start with the Harvard Medical School. I'm quoting here. Few public health messages are as powerful and as persistent as this one. Fat is bad. The average American has substantially reduced the percent of calories that she or he gets from fat over the past 3 decades, but we are not any healthier for all of this effort. In fact, we are worse off for it.
And fatter.
And fatter. We are worse off in every single category or major category of health than we were before we started thinking that, frankly, Carrie, food, right? Food has fat in it. Food-like products don't have fat in them because we extract the fat out, but naturally occurring things have fat in them.
And fat's one of the reasons natural foods taste so good.
And fat is a critical, remember, there is such thing as essential fatty acids. We need these or we get sick. There's such thing as an essential amino acid. We need these or we get sick. There is no such thing as an essential starch. There is no such thing as an essential sugar. Your body can synthesize glucose from protein,
right,
and it can run on fatty acids. So it's ironic that the one macronutrient that we do not need, that is a biological fact. If a human being never ate carbohydrate, again, not to say carbohydrate's bad, vegetables are carbohydrates, most beneficial food you could ever eat. It just means that to say that we should be getting, as we talked about in the last podcast, the government recommending 60+% of our calories from carbohydrate. The only way you can do that is by eating mass quantities of starch, and that is something that is just not needed by humans.
And it also makes us sick.
And it makes us sick.
And fat.
And fat. And it doesn't just make us sick and fat. A fun anecdote is that the way cattle are raised in this country is they generally are fed grass up until they reach a certain age. Then they're sent off to feedlots. The point of a feedlot is to make cattle get as fat as possible, as quickly as possible. Do you know what they feed cattle to make them fat quickly? Corn, starch. And it doesn't just make them fat, it also makes them sick. It creates an acidic environment in their stomach, which would kill them if they weren't going to be slaughtered anyway. So it doesn't, if you want to make cows fat and sick, you feed them starch. If you want to make people fat and sick, you feed them starch and sugar, which are biologically bioequivalent, basically, in the body.
And you mess with their hormones.
Because
I think it's fair to say that, because I'm not the scientific geek that you are, but I think it's fair to say that the corn that these animals are fed has been genetically, hormonally modified.
Oh,
so,
absolutely.
That makes it even worse.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, the genetically modified crops are just these crops, wheat, corn, all those kinds of things, hugely genetically modified. So doubly bad. So let's go through a few more studies here, Carrie. Actually, a little bit more than a few, because again, if you listen to this podcast and then you go start to talk to people about, I found out that fat isn't so bad for you, you will meet resistance. A lot of resistance. So let's make the goal of the rest of this podcast to equip you to meet these arguments head on with science. I would highly recommend you don't argue here, because I always like to say that biology is not a matter of opinion. It's a matter of fact, right? These are things we can study and we can prove. So there's no need to debate it. If you've got the facts on your side, which you do, just cite the facts. Trust me, they will not have facts to come back at you with. Our government has spent more than $1 billion, I'm not exaggerating, $1 billion trying to prove that a high starch, low protein, low fat diet is healthy. They have failed to prove that. And let's walk through some of the studies that were attempted to prove this and failed.
I think I should read a quote.
You're going to read a quote?
This is like our 14th podcast, and I've never read a quote.
Well, that's because they're my quotes.
Just one.
Okay.
Just let me read one quote.
What am I going to point to it, or
okay.
where? Okay.
Because I'm sure I'm not sure what everyone thinks about why I'm here, but I think I should do something sensible. To celebrate our 14th podcast or whatever number we're at.
Well, here's what we'll do, Carrie. I will introduce the study, and then and then you will do. I'm circling in my notes here, folks. What Carrie is going to help us out with here. So study the first. Doctors at the Children's Hospital and Research Center in Oakland examined 21 studies. It's called a meta-analysis, which included a total of 347,747 people, and found
there is no significant evidence for concluding that dietary saturated fat is associated with an increased risk of heart disease or cardiovascular disease.
Boom.
Take that.
Well, we've got a lot of, as Mr. T would say, we've got a lot of mo.
Yes.
So the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute funded an enormous trial, which was designed to link the consumption of foods containing fat to heart disease. This was a $115 million trial, and it took 12,866 men with high cholesterol, split them into two groups, and fed one group the government guidelines low-fat, low-protein, high-starch diet for 7 years with the hopes of lowering the incidence of heart disease. Carrie, tell me what the government's diet resulted in?
The government's diet resulted in a 7.1% increase in heart disease deaths.
Whoops. We didn't hear about that one in the news, did we? Okay, but that was only $115 million, Carrie. You know what the problem was is I don't think we spent enough money on that study. So the government's like, all right. We need more studies. So let's go ahead and do the Women's Health Initiative study from the National Institutes of Health, which is an amazing study and referenced heavily in the Smarter Science of Slim, but didn't show what a lot of people hoped it would show, ironically. And this was a $700 million. This is like Dr. Evil money. $700 million.
That is an obscene amount of money.
Obscene. And the reason it was so expensive, Carrie, is this study looked at 48,835 women over the course of 8 years and essentially divided them up into just eat what you'd normally eat or go on this higher starch, lower fat, lower protein government diet. And at the end of the study, the regular and government diet women weighed the same and had no differences in their health. Researchers concluded, and I'm quoting directly here, dietary intervention that reduced total fat intake did not significantly reduce the risk of coronary heart disease, stroke, or cardiovascular disease. Further, this trial is the largest long-term randomized trial of a dietary intervention ever conducted to our knowledge. It successfully achieved an 8.2% reduction in total fat intake. No significant effects on the incidence of coronary heart disease or stroke were observed. This one did get media attention, and the New York Times ran the headline, "Low-Fat Diet Does Not Cut Health Risks Study Finds."
Yay! Eat fat!
Yay! Yay!
Healthy fat, good fat.
Healthy fat, exactly. Healthy fat from whole food natural sources. So we got more, folks. We got more. So this next one is called the MONICA study. That's an acronym. It involved 113 groups of scientists and doctors in over 27 countries studying everything they thought could possibly contribute to heart disease. They found little, if any, association between the average cholesterol level and heart-related mortality.
Why? We've been talking about this for a one whole podcast and a half a podcast now. How do we not know this?
It's a very good question, Carrie. We'll get to this in later podcasts, but there's a lot of money to be made. Let's be very clear here. When an institution comes out and says, eat this way, it'll make you healthy, it's a pretty bitter pill to swallow to say, actually, we were wrong. And not only were we wrong, but we were so wrong that the reason there's this crisis in the country is because we did this. Right? Like, that's a really, really bitter pill to swallow.
But people are dying.
And I know you're not exaggerating. People are literally dying. And that's why I think we're seeing such a massive movement. To be very clear, people who've tried this diet have not been successful. And any major change, such as the low carbohydrate movement, such as the Paleolithic movement, these even a plant-based diet, which focuses more on non-starch and non-sweets, these lifestyles have seen dramatically better results. Basically, anyone who doesn't follow this de facto high-starch, low-protein, low-fat diet does do better. And there's been a lot of people who've promulgated different approaches that have had wild success.
But why isn't everybody else listening?
Because we continue to be inundated with these low-fat messages. If not from our government, from our grocery stores, right? We walk down the food aisles and we see low fat, therefore it's good for you, right? Like, oh, Starbursts, oh, it's low in fat, so it must be good for you. Oh, sugar smack puff things, oh, they've been enriched and they're low in fat, so they're good for you. Like, low in fat is treated as meaning something's healthy. You
see, now I'm getting upset because how can this happen?
Well,
in 2012, how can the people that run us, how can they allow this to continue?
Well, now I'm going to have to reel Carrie in. So, Carrie, I can't tell you that, but what I can tell you is that we can now leverage what scientists have shown to change this, right? And it's very simple. We vote with our dollars. If people understand this science and start making different purchasing decisions and demanding saner foods, things will absolutely change. Government and business will not sell products that no one buys.
But it's so difficult when even when you know this, the marketing and the advertising is so clever that when you walk in that store and it's got fat-free, it automatically sets off all of those kind of past messages that fat is bad and that this blueberry breakfast crunch has got blueberries in it, so it must be. And it's just, I mean, even I, who've been, brainwashed by Bailor,
in a good way,
in a good way, but I know this stuff inside and out now. And yet, even I, when I see the adverts, I don't go buy it, as you know. But it still rings of truth. It pulls at you. It pulls at your sensitivities, and you're just like, oh, yeah, red vines, they're fat-free. They're good for you. Red vines are wheat.
Well, and
nobody knows that.
What's even worse than that, Carrie, is like even someone such as yourself, such as myself, we do have choice. Like we could, even though it tugs on our emotions and tugs even on our rationality, because this is what we've been taught. But what I think really is I'm going to say it, a crime against humanity is these dietary guidelines. That is the document on which school lunch programs are based. And if you want funding for your school, you have to adhere to those guidelines.
Is that the same guidelines that declared that pizza was a vegetable?
Yes. Yep, those kind of things. And again, right, it's fine as long as it's lower in fat and starch and sugar are fine, but it's lower in fat. So the only recommendation I can make, Carrie, is for us to, again, let's look at what happened with tobacco. There was billions of dollars, and still is, in that was associated with people smoking. And of course, people who are in the tobacco industry want people to continue to smoke. Same thing applies now with food related products. But the public became equipped with knowledge and things changed. So let's continue to equip ourselves with knowledge and step through a few more studies.
Okay,
Is that okay?
I just got to say this one thing.
Okay, one more thing.
And you can edit this out if you want. But it's not like we're saying, with tobacco, it's just like don't smoke at all.
Yep.
We're not saying that. The food companies, yes, we're never going to want to not have to have food. Just make us good food.
That's a great point,
we're not
Carrie.
trying to take their livelihood away. We're just saying don't kill us.
Yeah, we're not saying we won't buy anything from you. We're saying we'd like to buy food.
Right.
And food...
Which is very different to the tobacco industry, because we're saying don't buy it at all.
Exactly.
We're not saying that. We're saying just give us something that doesn't kill us, make us fat, or give us diabetes.
Well stated. Well stated.
I'm going to try and pipe down.
Well, no, it's cool. It's cool.
I'm going to go and sit in the corner, calm down for a minute.
So, some more studies further that will enrage Carrie further. So the Western Electric study, which is known in academic circles as, quoting, the most informative prospective study to date, the researchers concluded, although the focus of dietary recommendations is usually a reduction of saturated fat intake, no relation between saturated fat intake and the risk of coronary heart disease was observed in this study. There's no shortage of data here, friends. In the Malamo Diet and Cancer Study, approximately 30,000 men and women were split into 4 groups according to their intake of foods that contained fat. After 6 years of observation, researchers found, quoting, individuals receiving more than 30% of their total daily energy from fat and more than 10% from saturated fat did not have increased mortality. Current dietary guidelines concerning fat intake are thus generally not supported by our observational results. I'll briefly point out just 3 more studies. That's the Nurses' Health Study, the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study, and the Nurses' Health Study 2. Together, these studies tracked about 300,000 people. None of these studies showed total fat intake increasing the risk of heart disease. The only conclusive finding regarding fats was that eating more plant fats, such as the omega-3 fats found in flax seeds, chia seeds, things like that, and nuts, lowers the risk of heart disease. The researchers involved reported intake of linoleic acid, which is an unsaturated fat, was inversely related with the risk of myocardial infarction, heart attacks. These data do not support the strong association between the intake of saturated fat and the risk of coronary heart disease suggested by international comparisons, which I believe is a wink at the Ansel Keys study of, oh, look at this international comparison. So Dr. Hu from Harvard University really sums this up. It is now increasingly recognized that the low-fat campaign has been based on little scientific evidence and may have caused unintentional health consequences. The government was trying to help with these guidelines, but they failed. And even worse, they keep on failing. Scientists know it, and the data show it. And actually, Carrie, we can kind of explain why we haven't been told about it. And I think that's what we should do in the next podcast. And it has to do with this big business of low-fat foods. What do you think?
I'm still in the corner trying to keep calm.
Trying to keep calm. Well, folks, while Carrie calms down, I think we've covered a lot of good stuff to think about this week. And one quick disclaimer is I think the takeaway that we've talked about so far, this podcast and the last podcast, is not necessarily go to your cupboard and eat a stick of butter. That's not the takeaway. The takeaway is food. People are designed, we evolved to eat things that are found in nature. There are things that exist in nature that contain fat. To think that those things kill us when they didn't for hundreds of thousands of years, and during the 40 years in which we actively tried to avoid them in favor of starches and sweets, we did start dying and becoming obese en masse. I think, and there's a bunch of science to back all this up. So there's some common sense there. Here's some science on top. The takeaway is, if it's a food that you can find directly in nature, something that our ancestors could have enjoyed, it's not only not going to kill you, but it's way, way better for you than the 40,000 food-like edible products that are in the center aisles of your grocery store. Stay on the perimeter, stick with the non-starchy vegetables, stick with the nutrient-dense seafoods and meats, stick with the whole food natural fats like nuts and seeds, and stick with the low sugar fruits such as berries and citrus fruits. And that way you can be calm and happy like Carrie is now.
And I'm even smiling.
Ding! Thanks, folks, for listening. This is Jonathan Bailor, Carrie Brown, living the smarter science of slim. Eat more, exercise less, but smarter. Next week, we'll pick up where we left off. See you then. Wait, don't stop listening yet. If you like the podcast and if there's other ways we can help you, please join us in the Smarter Science of Slim support group, which is freely available at the Smarter Science of Slim website, smarterscienceofslim.com. There you'll find all kinds of free recipes and success stories and just all kinds of fun stuff like how to help your kids go sane and just great community content.
And just one last thing before you go, if you wouldn't mind heading over to iTunes and up onto Amazon.com and leaving us a review, and then going over to Facebook and liking us, we would hugely appreciate it.